Hey there, Frank. How are you?
Hey, Amanda.
Thank you for chatting with me today. I'm excited about what we're going to talk about. This came up so we're going to talk about jargon and messaging. And this came up because we were looking at a site and we really liked the copy on it. And even as we were creating some of our own changes to our copy on our site, we're always looking at messaging. Jargon was in it. And it was like the first time that I was like, I actually don't mind this. Why is this okay? And you were like, it's okay because, and you really walked me through it. Usually as a consultant and as a company, we try to oftentimes steer clear of jargon or things that could be confusing, but it actually has its place. And you shared some really insightful things around why it's okay. So even before we get into diving into some of those questions, tell us a little bit about your role and like what you do here.
Yeah. So one, I'm very excited too. It's always fun stuff. Two, I am a brand strategist at Lone Fir Creative, but a big part of my background, part of Lone Fir was being a copywriter. So I've worked on probably over 100 different clients with messaging, brand messaging, positioning, a lot of different stuff. And so language is very dynamic, and we've been able to use that in a variety of different ways, industries, channels. And so I think it is really unique, and as nitty gritty as it can seem sometimes, it really does play a massive role in, becoming a really strong brand and becoming a strong business and kind of taking up a stronger position in your customers' eyes. So yeah, I think it's really cool and super important.
Awesome. I love that. So today when we're talking about jargon, I guess it's going to mean a few different things. It's going to mean when a brand maybe uses terms that are specific to an industry or specific to an audience. Maybe if they have nuances in how they create content or copy, as well as maybe if they have a really strong opinion or personality that might come across intense. So with that in mind, what are some of at the heart of this is messaging. So what are some of the things with messaging that we are going to keep in mind today?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier, right? We tend to advise people to stay away from jargon, and a lot of times that's true, because the most well-known elements of really strong messaging is clarity, right? We never want to sacrifice clarity, and throughout this call, at no point are we trying to say anything that would sacrifice that. And I think so most of the time when we, steer clients away from using these heavy points of terminology, it's because they're not being clear, and usually that's not clear. And then the second is tone, right? Tone of voice and things like that. And so most people know those two dynamics. We have to be clear about what you do, who you are, how you help people. And then tone, right? You talk about personality, and those things are always primary for sure. But all of communication, whether it's brand messaging or even between you and I right now, it's very, very dynamic. It's fluid, it's contextual. And I believe there's a lot of other things that need to be considered as well, because they're critical to further support your position and attract the right audience, or even, add credibility to your pitch or things like that. So yes, we'll talk about, I think some things like jargon can have their place, and using certain, industry terms or terms that certain audiences would resonate with, and maybe, produce a little bit more of interest from certain type of people. So yeah, I think it does have its place.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right in. What are some of the reasons that a brand might include jargon, or like we talked about those nuances in their content and messaging?
Yeah. So I think particularly with, you have different markets, B2B, D2C, you could have, I think the easiest place to start is maybe with like a lifestyle brand. So one that comes to mind for me, I'm into, sports and everything like that, but Specialized, and even if you don't know who they are, they're a bike company. They're a premium bike company. You'll see them in the Tour de France and all these other things. They've been known for the longest time as this very high-end bike company. And what you'll notice about their site and the content that they put out, it's very, very jargon heavy. It uses a lot of terms like berms and hot laps and these things that no one else would really know outside of people who are really hard riders, and people that have really high expectations of the brand. And what that does for them is help them maintain and keep up this premium position. They're not trying to attract, amateur riders. I'm sure they're more than welcoming to amateur riders who want to purchase their products. That's great, but they want to keep up this image and brand, kind of brand picture that they are for the premium writer. They're for people who have been around the industry, know what they're doing. And so that contributes a lot to what they have to say. And so they'll continue to mirror who they are by using very, very jargon heavy language, but you'll always notice that they're clear. Just because you use jargon, you still have to know who you are and what you do, but they're in a market where they can do that. The second, let's say if we're looking at a B2B brand, is maybe you want to attract a much higher level crowd that, if you're looking for data analysts or investors or people that are studying markets or things like that, they're usually pretty heady, right? Very, very intellectual, and a lot of the content they read might sound like that. So it could be worth talking how they talk, as long as it's still clear. It can also add to your credibility, right? If I was talking about finance and I'm saying words like just get a lot of money and just like grow my bank account, make my piggy bank big, like it'd be like, you don't really know what you're talking about, because there's terms fit for this industry. And so it could be very, very valuable, and almost to your detriment if you don't use certain terms that people would expect you to, if you know what you're talking about.
I agree. And I think, when we talk about, like, we use a story brand framework in so much of the messaging that we do, and part of that is establishing authority. And if you don't sound like you have authority in your space with how you speak and your messaging, well, then you're going to miss the boat on a lot of things. And absolutely, if a financial, any financial firm, whether it's, even if it's a B2C firm versus the B2B firm, if they were to say piggy bank or get you more money, it doesn't feel very authoritative.
Exactly.
Well, kind of going into that a little bit further, how would a brand know if jargon maybe would be good for them to start, or would be not start, because they probably already are using it, but is good for them to have in their content or copy?
I'd say one of the biggest indicators can be the difference between vertical and horizontal markets. So for those who may not know vertical market, you're basically functioning on a subset audience of an industry. It's the same audience all the time. You're just trying to increase your business within that very specific and niche market. Horizontal market being you're trying to go after the masses, basically. And so when you're in a vertical market, it's a lot more common and even more beneficial or advantageous in that case that you're going to want to use language that's very, very tied to how that niche audience might communicate and talk or speak. So yeah, it's really beneficial if you're in a vertical market. Again, use discernment with those things, but it's likely going to sound a lot more familiar to those audiences in that case. Whereas in horizontal markets could mean you're likely just going for a much larger or broad audience, where you really just have to use a lot more simple, very universal language that a wider majority would understand. And there's nothing wrong with either. It really just depends on who you're going after and what you're trying to accomplish with your messaging. So that would be one. The second is look into how your audience communicates, right? I mean, at Loanfer, right, we want people to understand that we don't just understand design and websites. We have a team that's very, very business minded on the back end. And so we'll talk about things like profit margin. We'll talk about things like market share and revenue and things like that, because we understand it, and we want our customers to understand that those are the spaces that we have skill sets in. And so we speak like that. So understanding your audience and how they would have a conversation, you're just trying to mirror that. So I would say that's a great place to start too. Look at how they're talking to one another, look at the content that they read, look at the other, forms of messaging, and look at how they might post. How do they talk when they're sharing information? Could be a good start.
I really like that. I even think think about a refrigeration repair person. If they're going to be a commercial refrigeration repair person, the kind of copy and content that's going to be on their website or in their messaging is going to be specific to the commercial space. That might be a grocery store, it might be something, and the wording on it is going to be jargony. Where when you're looking for somebody to come to your home and fix your refrigerator because it's broken, you don't know all of those terms. And so even just like that messaging is super different. And I also really liked how you called out, you can share what your expertise is in your organization, or in your skill set based on how you communicate the words that you use. I think that's really important too. I really liked that.
Yeah.
So jargon can be kind of fun. It can, it's fun to think about. It's fun to have nuances and strong personality in your content and in your messaging, but it can also be kind of dangerous. So what are some of the things that brands should keep in mind as they're, building out content and copy and messaging?
Yeah, that's a great question. One is, as we said at the beginning of the call, clarity, right? It still needs to say who you are, what you do, how you help people, and it should be stupid easy to understand. That's probably not the most professional language to use in this call, but really it should be. It should be really, really simple for that audience to understand. And so, you're not going to want to say things like that seem so vague as if they don't have a point, that they're just very high level words that don't actually have a simple point to understand. So if I were to say something like, hey, I'm gonna comprehend the content in this literature for, it's like you're just basically sounding like a thesaurus, where in certain elements you just might want to use one or two words for the main portion of the context that you're or content that you're talking about. So yes, you always want to be clear and always speak to the challenge that you solve, how you do it, the opportunities that you give to people. Let's say it's more aspirational, you should still be ridiculously clear about those things, so it's really easy to understand. You're just using certain vernacular in the cases that it's most appropriate or people would respond to well. Again, it's always using language to the benefit of the consumer or the client, not yourself.
I absolutely love that. Literally, as you were talking, so basically you want your messaging and your content and your copy to be as easy as possible for the user or the end consumer to digest and to understand.
Exactly.
And so if that means using a word, like a jargon word that maybe would take 15 words to explain, but your key audience knows it, well, then use that word. It's going to be easier. Having their best interest at heart is what's most important.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would summarize it in that way, and it's always there. These are just, I would break down language into the areas of, you have conscious language is like, what does it actually say? And then you have those subconscious elements. And I think that what we're talking about can drive a subconscious or emotional response, which, as anyone in marketing knows, is really how people make decisions. We like to think we're super logical, but we're really not. We make decisions on how we feel. And so a lot of this, although it can seem really nuanced, is actually very critical to a company's or brand's overall strategy. So
And I think one of the things we've a little bit touched on too is just there's also like that emotional side where you feel like you're part of a tribe that follows a brand or an audience, a fan, and it makes you feel really close to a brand if there's they're net promoters. Use a certain speak if they use certain words. Even when you think about sports teams, they all have their own sayings. People that are super into specific musicians, they have sometimes their own way that they dress or way that they speak. And I think that just goes to show like a brand can do that too.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's critical.
Frank, this was super fun. I always like talking to you about brand stuff.
Yeah, I love talking about it, as you know. So it was great.
All right, see you later.
Bye.